Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from Indy Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
Just trying to get us centered, get us aligned. That was a word that Barry Odom used today as he was talking about why he came to Purdue, why he believes he can be successful immediately at Purdue, and why Mike Bobinski picked him to come to Purdue. Introductory press conference down the tunnel here at Mackey Arena, attended by any number of dignitaries and us, and a pretty decent crowd, like
for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning.
Yeah. A few hundred people, not bad. But obviously a celebratory moment for Purdue after what had been a season void of celebratory moments, and so trying to build some excitement here to get this going. It's going to be, Mike Bobinski, talking to him today, said something he said at the Ryan Walters post-firing press conference, which was, he thinks this is a good job, but that doesn't mean it's an easy job. They had to go find the right person with the right sort of resolve and fortitude to take on a challenge like this. And I guess just what are your impressions, having now been face-to-face in the same room with, standing next to, talking to Barry Odom?
I actually asked Barry Odom after the press conference today. Some of us met with him one-on-one for a handful of minutes on the Mackey Arena court. And I said something along those lines of, Mike Bobinski has said, this is not an easy job. And he said, well, that's one of the attractions is like, if you're a competitor, if you like to work, and you get a chance to go to a place that, probably coming off a 1-11 season, there's not a lot of expectations for. You want to go out and prove that, hey, I can win. And one of the things that I actually had mentioned to Mike Bobinski when you were talking to him in the hallway, and I just kind of intervened, was the
Budinsky. Bobinski and Budinsky.
Lost my train of thought here.
That's why I'm here, folks.
When he took the job at Missouri, he was elevated to head coach. There was some turmoil going on with some NCAA violations and things of that sort. And he went through a kind of a tumultuous first season and then won, I think, 8 games in year 2. Went to UNLV, where there was no football history to speak of, and won 19 games in 2 years. And Mike Bobinski said, well, that didn't hurt. That didn't hurt his case at all. Doesn't sound like that was the major or the number one reason why he went out and got him, but that helped. And I think, and what I'm going to write at some point today, is this just seems to kind of match. And we talked about this the other day. Barry Odom seems like a Purdue guy, kind of in a way, of the way he talked about being blue collar, hard nosed, tough, grit, determination, all the key words, I guess. And I asked Mike Bobinski about that in the press conference. He said, yeah, we were kind of wired very similarly in that regard. And I knew that within 3 seconds of talking to him. So I think that it seems kind of a more natural fit. I don't want to throw shade at Ryan Walters, but it was a different kind of flair and flamboyance with him than you're getting with Barry Odom. Everything from the whole parade and charade and pomp and circumstance that came with the Ryan Walters introductory press conference, which was not Ryan Walters' fault. He didn't tell them to do that. It's just what they did. To Barry Odom going out in center court at Mackey Arena and standing in front of a few people, addressing them, and then coming back. Seemed very down to earth and just kind of like, hey, I'm here as the football coach, but I'm here to work and I'm ready to go do that first and foremost.
Listen, Purdue, Mike Bobinski, however you want to word it, took a shot with Ryan Walters, and part of that was his personality. It was the being maybe a little bit more brash, a little bit. He was very confident and forward about that confidence. And when you were trying to extend the success you already had there, the base of success that you were handing off from Jeff Brom, I think that made some sense. I think for this job, I think they needed to do something more like what they have done and get someone who is going to be dedicated to a process, because he is trying to do everything he can right now to build a roster for 2025. We'll go into that a little bit more in detail in a minute. But I just think it makes more sense they had to get someone who could dig his heels in and put in the work to build this back. He rejected the term rebuild. He said, I don't believe in rebuild projects. He is promising a quick turnaround. Now, we can argue what quick turnaround means. If that they have to return to a level of competitiveness before they can return to a level of winning, probably. And the schedule for next season is not super easy by any stretch. But he definitely, the thing that Mike Bobinski also kept coming back to was scheme, recruiting, all those things. You still needed someone who believed in the overall mission and what was possible at Purdue, but also someone who recognized that it's going to be a tough job. It's going to not be an overnight success. And that takes a commitment both from the coach that's being hired and the athletic administration.
Yeah, very much so. And to be honest, in the way some of these coaching transitions work after a firing in this day and age, there's not time to really study a whole lot the job that you're going into sometimes. And I had asked Barry Odom, what do you know about this Purdue roster? And he just met guys yesterday for the first time. Yep. So it's basically whatever you can gauge from them in that short period of time. One very interesting note, though, Ryan Walters was the defensive coordinator for Barry Odom at Missouri, and the two have talked. And Ryan Walters, who has kind of been shown not a lot of ill will towards the way things ended here, is willing to provide whatever details or background or whatever kind of information Barry Odom would need about individual players. So even though he's not tied to Purdue University anymore, other than receiving sums of money for the next 3 years, he's still willing to kind of do Purdue right in this regard and really help out a friend who's the one who's succeeding him as head coach.
And they have a relationship. That helps a lot.
Right.
Like the fact that they have the existing
relationship.
relationship.
If he had no ties to Barry Odom, I don't know that he's going to offer that.
Right. And I'm sure that Barry Odom would have to reach out to someone like Ryan Walters, especially, Mike Bobinski was vetting candidates. He said he talked to about, I think he said 10 people, and some of those sort of deselected themselves from the process. But quickly he said it had been several weeks that Barry Odom had, and that could mean anything. He didn't get more specific than that to me. He said several weeks that Barry Odom had kind of risen to the top of the list. And but at the same time, Barry Odom then has to go do his own research. He has to vet Mike Bobinski and make sure that he's leaving a good place. He's having success at UNLV. More to the point, he's having success there that can springboard him to a job like this. So is this the one you want to take? Is this the one you can't pass up? And I think he found enough things about Mike Bobinski that he thought was legit, and about Purdue that he thought was legit, that he decided to come aboard. It helped that they're going to pay him $39 million over 6 years. That was the contract amount and length. He's paid $6 million in each of the first 2 years. Then it accelerates $250,000 for years 3 and 4, then $7 million in year 5, $7.25 million in year 6, up to eligible right now up to $1.5 million in various bonuses per year. And they're also paying the $3 million buyout that he was owed or he owes UNLV. If you want to get into the buyouts and stuff, like all that information is posted at IndyStar.com. Suffice to say, I don't believe they'll be firing him after 2 years because it will cost significantly more than it could cost to fire Ryan Walters after 2 years, which was a chunk of change.
I think $5 million would be the number there, right? Is that correct?
No, that's the number he would pay if he were to leave. But it's the same contract as Walters. He's owed 75% of his remaining salary. So I'll just go and say after 2 years, it would be $20.625 million by my calculations. So I think he's going to get a little bit more rope here. I think he's going to get some more time to figure this out. But I talked to Mike Bobinski about this because there's a lot of things crashing together here right now. There's what it takes to separate from Ryan. There's what it takes to bring in the next head coach and his staff, by the way. Now, they did not enumerate in the contract that they only gave us a summary, but it will not be enumerated in the contract how much money is set aside for assistants. Ryan Walters in his contract had $5.5 million for 10 assistants and a head of strength and conditioning. That's not going to be specified that way in the contract for Odom, partially, I believe, because it probably will be less than Indiana just gave Chris Ignetti. They don't want that head-to-head. I don't think they're going to get all the way to the $11 million that he was given, but it's also more open-ended. It's just like it's going to take whatever it takes.
Right. I think he said if it takes X amount to get the guy he wants, okay, like we're open to negotiating.
And frankly, with Brennan Marion out there as a guy, Barry Odom told me I'm talking to several guys right now about offensive coordinator. They're all coaching in bowl games. I tried to get him to say like, hey, should we just like take him off the list of candidates? He didn't say that. So he said there could be a resolution on that and other positions in a few days. But the point being, like, there is a big financial component to this and the revenue share that Purdue's going to participate in fully starting next fall. And I asked, like, well, how did you do that? Like, how did you convince the President Mung Chang, who was here today and gave remarks, and the board of trustees, like, how'd you get them on board? And he said, well, that we definitely had to like sit down and like spread it all out, because it's a significant amount of money, but there was zero hesitation. They all said, this is too important. You have to do what you have to do. We have to get this going the right way. And I think it's still, again, relative to the rest of the Big Ten, while $6 million sounds like a lot, and it's $2 million more than Ryan Walters is making, I think this would have been like 14th in the Big Ten in head coach salaries. So they're still in the bottom third with room to grow if you do well, as Indiana just proved with Kurt Cignetti. But it's still showing that Purdue is not really, I guess, leaving anything on the table right now in terms of football. They're willing to put resources behind it to get this moving back in the right direction.
Yeah, I think going 1-11 is a pretty good blanket statement of like, hey, listen, this didn't work with the restrictions that football previously had on it. And, some of that's probably the coaching staff's fault. Some of that's probably the finances that came into play and really hindered you in trying to get, some key parts of your football program that you probably needed. So, it's not an open checkbook going forward, but it sounds like Purdue is ready to make a financial commitment and say, hey, like, we were maybe behind getting this thing going a little bit, but we're trying to play catch up kind of in a hurry here.
I think we're going to get some more details soon. We're pushing for more details, and hopefully we'll get them about exactly how the university is going to change its approach to a number of financial things with the athletic department, because there's going to have to be some concessions on the part of the athletic department. And we've heard that could be as far as what money the athletic department gives back to the university, which it has done consistently over the years, and other Big Ten programs do that too. As far as maybe how the university helps with some debt things to the major capital projects here, being Mackey Arena, Ross Stadium, that sort of thing. Like, we think there might be some relief coming in those things, but there's going to have to be some accounting changes done to pay for, especially the revenue share. Like, that's a big hit. $20.5 million is going to be a big hit. Mike Bobinski said he sounds like across the board in the Big Ten, people are going to be doing that, and the lion's share of that, or a big chunk of that, a significant chunk of that, is going to go to football.
There's a lot of schools, though, throughout the country that are not fully participating in that. So, I think that is a big deal, especially when you're talking about, what investing in athletics and for what we're specifically talking about football. That $20.5 million says we're on par with everybody else who's fully participating in this.
So we don't yet know about the staff. I know that's the question that people have. We don't have reportable things to tell you about this staff. Barry Odom did tell us that it could be in a couple of days where they start getting more clarity on this. One of the things he's sensitive to is his team plays in the Los Angeles Bowl, I believe, and
presented by Gronk.
Rob Gronkowski?
Yeah.
Really? So that's at play, that he wants to be respectful of the job that those guys still have to do if he's bringing guys from his staff. There's also the matter of guys like Brendan Marion who have opportunities elsewhere, who may be in talks with other programs. And even if they aren't in talks with other programs, or maybe especially because they are, and Purdue could still bring them in, that is a separate negotiation. It's not like really Barry Odom would be the one doing that negotiation almost. It's really between Purdue and that coach to some extent to come to a contract resolution to bring them here. And it would probably, as we talked about the other day, in some of these cases, especially Brendan Marion's, it might take a bit of money to get to secure them. So I know people are antsy about that. We are too. We're eager to give you details on that, and we will as soon as we can. We do know a little bit. We did talk roster today. Let's start with the transfer portal. And he said this up front in his, I can't remember if he said this in the comments. It was probably in the media room. It was probably in the press conference version of this, where he said, I talked to a bunch of guys yesterday. Let's be honest, like, we're not going to bring all those guys back, right? That there's going to be guys who have opportunities. I know that there's people at Ohio State who've reached out to me about Brendan Thieneman, not coaches, but Dylan Thieneman, sorry. There's so many Thienemans. Dylan Thieneman.
Brendan Thieneman has no eligibility left.
No. Well, I just talked about Brendan Marion. I think that was how it all got transposed. Yes, they I believe that is a program that is involved with him and have believed that for a while, or is interested in him. And that's going to be true of the most important guys that have gone in the portal for Purdue so far. And one other thing I talked to Mike Babinski about today was, because I wanted clarity on this. You keep talking about revenue sharing and next fall and how that's going to equalize everything. Well, you got to sign a class right now. You've got to get transfer portal guys right now. How does that work? And he said, well, you cannot give them money yet, but you can negotiate with them for money that they will get next fall after July 1. And that's where the real equalizer might be for Purdue right now, because I had been sort of operating under the assumption that you couldn't really touch that money yet. The settlement hasn't been completely approved, and maybe they can build those contingencies into these contracts that they write with guys. But if you can now tell guys, in the past where it used to be, well, we don't have this money on hand right now, we can't give you our own money, we can only go by what the collective has, they can now say, we can give you. I talked to someone who kind of referred to it as sort of a signing bonus right now. Like, we'll give you a little bit up front, but the big hit is going to come next fall. Like, when we will start paying after July 1st, we can start paying you the same as every other team in the Big Ten can. That could be huge, not only for keeping guys here this winter, but also pulling in more talent from the portal.
Yeah, and so back to when I was asking about Ryan Walters, because I think how I initially started to phrase the conversation was, do you believe this roster that was at Purdue in 2024 was far better than the 1-11 record that the team posted? And I said, I don't expect you to, throw Ryan Walters under the bus here. It didn't work out, and there's a number of reasons why that might be. And he kind of said, from that, he didn't have a fully educated opinion about it, but he did say, like, based on what he knows about this roster now, having probably researched it for a couple of weeks, he feels like if he can retain the players he wants to retain, I imagine that includes Dylan Thieneman. I imagine that it includes Max Player, and probably a couple of other guys who are in the transfer portal right now. I think that he believes they're off to a good start. They've got a good base to start from, to kind of hit the ground running and have success, however you define that, or at least improvements, and build from there.
Well, listen, they weren't that far from teams like Illinois, Michigan State, Northwestern. It wasn't like those were games were out of reach for this team. It just made too many self-destructive mistakes it just didn't have enough to overcome self-destructive mistakes. I think you could take the same foundation they had last year and coach it better from top down. That's not just a shot at Ryan Walters. I think it's everybody on that staff. You can get a better, Mike Lewinsky himself said that staff really wasn't ever all on the same page, wasn't cohesive. If you can get that in place and go through a season with that same group, maybe you find your way to come over the top in 2 or 3 of those games. That's not enough. Like, that's not where Purdue wants to be. Purdue isn't going to be satisfied with 3 or 4 wins. I'm just saying that would be an example of why that 1-11 wasn't that roster may not have been resigned to 1-11. We all thought watching it that it could have been better. It was just so discombobulated that they couldn't get there. But what do you feel like, from talking to Barry Odom? Like, he comes right out and he says, quick turnaround. Like, what do you think is a fair thing to expect in year one, which is a really speculative thing to talk about when the roster is still as chewed up as it is right now?
Yeah, that's what I'm actually writing as you lured me out of the media room there to come out here. Is like, what does this roster look like? It's a mystery right now. Barry Odom probably has a decent idea of what he's got to work with from the conversations he's had with Purdue guys, probably knowing what he's getting from UNLV, at least some players that will transfer here, and clearly signed a class at UNLV, and he's going to try to pluck the players off of that he thinks are capable of playing at Purdue, including his son and his son's high school teammate as well, who just Nathan wrote a minute ago, are going to come to Purdue instead of UNLV. So I think he's got a good idea, but there's still a lot of things that remain. We saw Muhammad Musa just committed to Louisville, who's a 3-year starting offensive lineman. That hurts from an experience standpoint. That probably is a piece that's replaceable. I don't know if a Thieneman or a Claire or a Will Helt, even Ryan Brown, who's an experienced quarterback, whether he's a starter next year or not, as a guy who's been around. And if Purdue runs the go-go offense, which is what UNLV ran, I think he kind of makes sense as a quarterback in that system. So I think there are some key targets that you have to get, but I do think that this is, I don't know if you want to call it a rebuild or whatever, but I think this is a team that can win, at a higher rate than it has clearly in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I'm keeping my expectations in check just because the schedule doesn't give them a lot of room for error, just like this year's schedule didn't give them a lot of room for error. They get to start off, though, with 2 very winnable games, and I think that has to be attractive if you're coming in and you're Barry Odom and you're like, okay, well, I'm not starting off with a Big Ten road game on a Thursday or whatever, and then or even a home game. Imagine Indiana has played Ohio State to open its season on like a Thursday a couple of times in the last decade. So imagine if next year Purdue was opening with Ohio State and going at Notre Dame, and that's what you're handing to the coach off a 1-11 season. Instead, he gets Ball State and Southern Illinois. And I think that's a better way to kind of ramp up into what they have. I have a couple of pieces up on IndyStar.com and JCOnline.com. I assume you guys took them that are kind of roster breakdowns, offense and defense, and I started doing this as an exercise of like, well, where do they need help the most? It's just everywhere. They just need help everywhere. It might be a whole new offensive line. They need significant help at linebacker, in my opinion. Maybe cornerback can be a little bit of a strength, but it depends on whether you get some guys back. Safety, it depends on Thieneman. Receiver court, you need playmakers. Quarterback, the thing that I think if you're a coach, you want to establish a multi-year quarterback. And that's what Ryan Brown and or Marcus Davila can provide you. And if you have neither of them, you're probably looking for a short-term fix in the portal while you try to get that long-term guy. But Barry Odom has had legit quarterbacks. The last 2 years, despite that being a very run-happy offense, the go-go offense, the Mountain West Conference leader in quarterback efficiency the last 2 years has been a UNLV quarterback. So they know how to operate within that system and get passing production. And he's had people like Drew Lock in the past and Missouri. That name came up today. Like, I think he'll find his way. Drew Lock
also threw for 1 million yards the last time Missouri played at Purdue. So.
Yes. And so Purdue fans are well aware of Drew Lock in Missouri. And he's found those sorts of quarterbacks before. He's found other coordinators besides Brennan Marion. I still have questions about what that's all going to look like. What's the issue right now is because he even brought this up himself today. He was asked about, I think, style of play and how he's going to attack things. He said, well, it's got to mesh with your roster. And this first roster might not be built around a cohesive vision of a scheme on either side of the ball. It might be you have to get talent. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they are going to take that into account more, but I think you've got to just find talent at every position, and then build towards your identity. I think that could be the hard thing to do in year one is say, this is Purdue's identity. But as I just wrote about, Mike Bobinski found a guy in Jeff Brom who gave Purdue an identity again after it had gone a long stretch without one, really. I would argue both the Hope and Hazel years, I think, were void of the identity that Purdue needed to establish. It did it with Brom. It had the wrong identity under Ryan Walters, always playing from behind, being very vulnerable on defense, the mistakes. Like, it's got to get an identity back, a competitive identity back. And I think Barry Odom now has to build to that. I don't know if you can just come in and by week 3 next year say this is what we are. But I think by year 2, you should be pointed in that direction.
Yeah, and so what, to your point, what Barry Odom said in regards to that is like you have to take the roster you have and not ask them to do things they're not capable of doing, which is something that I think last year especially Purdue was asking some players to do things that they just didn't have the talent to accomplish. And that's a bad sign and why you end up going 1-11 and why you end your season losing by 66 points. But when Jeff Brom came in, I remember thinking like, man, this roster is so good. They're never going to win. And
bowl game year 1.
Yeah.
Bowl win year.
He took a roster that was not great talent wise and said, okay, how can we construct this thing to kind of amp up their strengths and make them better players than maybe the talent wins them to be. And you go to a bowl game and beat Arizona, I think, in San Francisco or something. Was that the first year?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Foster Farms.
Then you come back and you have a kind of a down year, which was like 4-8 or something. But he, off of that.
Well, they went to a bowl that second year too, but lost the bowl game.
Okay. There was the year where they had Karlaftis and David Bell. That class, they played a lot of freshmen and it ended up. I remember right after the IU game that year of a 4-8 season, I was like, this wasn't great from a win-loss standpoint, but in experience, this may pay off big time down the road, and Purdue ends up in a Big Ten championship game. So, yes, somebody like that who can come in and say, okay, how can we use the strengths of the roster we do have until we get the guys that we do. That's why I asked the question today is like, at some point, this has to transition from the strengths of the roster you have and how you can exemplify that to get the best out of it. And then recruiting guys for the system you want to run. And that's kind of where he went off and didn't probably get the answer that I wanted to. And the way the press conference was constructed, I had already hit the mic off and wish I would have still had to ask kind of a follow-up question. But I think this is a team that's going to have kind of that, gritty mentality of like, whatever it takes to win and however we can put these guys in the best situation to be successful, rather than whoever the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator and special teams coordinator are, just say, okay, this is what these guys are capable of doing. Let's, at least for now, tier the system to that, and then we'll transition when we get the players that we want to run what we had previously been successful with moving or at UNLV.
Very talented special teams coordinator also that he had at UNLV, who's been at a couple other places. Have been
special teams coordinator of the year, I believe.
He was last year. Yes, this year in the Mountain West, and has had success at Virginia Tech and Memphis and several other places. So just another guy to keep in mind that could eventually join the staff, perhaps. Anything else you want to hit before we sign off?
No, these things always go well the first day. The coaches.
This is the easy part.
Yeah, the coaches come up and thank people like us for being there. We have to be there. We were there when the team was 1-11. So, but you always get kind of a good vibe the first day, the first week, whatever it might be, because you haven't lost the game yet. So obviously we'll find out much more throughout spring football, which we don't even know the dates on those yet. I'm sure we'll find out in the coming weeks, and then find out if there's a spring game or anything of that sort. But that's probably when we'll get more real intel on. And by then we'll know who the coaching staff is too, on what this team is and what it may look like going into the fall.
We will know the schedule on Wednesday, so come back to jconline.com, indystar.com for that. We'll have some analysis of exactly the path that Barry Odom's going to have to take in his first year. But with that, we're signing off from Mackey Arena. Thanks for joining us. We will be back to you again soon here on Boilers Extra.